Any day now, the province will decide the fate of the school year for the roughly 2 million students currently cooling their heels at home. In the meantime, the online learning, homeschooling, and other back of the envelope efforts at education are underway across Ontario. How does it all inform the path forward after what might turn out to be the longest March break in history? Let's ask all of them here in the provincial capital. Annie Kidder, Executive Director for People for Education; Prachi Srivastava, Associate Professor, specializing in education and international development at Western University; and Caroline Alphonso, education reporter with the Globe and Mail. And it's great to see you three on TVO tonight. Let's, Annie, get you right into this. The kids have been out of school now for 2 months, out of the classrooms, that is to say, but they have been doing some kind of education over the last 5 weeks or so. In your view, what is the quality of the education they have been getting?
Oh, well, I think it's really hard to answer that question because it's happening in the privacy of their own homes. And maybe the most important answer is that it's different for every single kid and every single family. And that's probably the hardest thing right now, is that we can't make one policy or one system or one method work for all families. They all have different capacities. They're all living in different situations. I heard somebody say yesterday, which I loved, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And I think that that's why it's hard to tell in terms of quality, or even from a practical perspective, what they're actually doing. But there's learning going on for sure, and the learning is taking many different forms.
We'll talk more about that in a bit. Prachi, learning going on, but how would you rate the quality of what is being learned?
I think, as Annie has said, it is very hard to have an answer to that because we're just too early into it. The one thing is that if we had had perhaps more clear directives from the ministry earlier on, and even have a pared down curriculum, have some objectives that are somewhat more transparent, we might be in a better situation in terms of being able to really assess that. As we are in the current state, schools and school boards and teachers really are doing the best they can in the context that we're in, as are most parents. So there will be some differences. There's a study that's just come out in the Netherlands, which has shown differential effects of homeschooling. Exactly as Annie has said, some parents are better able to support and some are not. And all of us as parents are also going through the same issues in terms of working from home, increased demands, increased caring responsibilities. All of that will have an effect.
And Caroline, what would you add to that?
I think, as Annie pointed out, it varies from one household to the other. I think it's been a steep learning curve, not only for teachers, but also for families. There's technology happening in homes. School boards have done a tremendous job in providing technology to students and families that don't have it. So that sort of happened initially off the bat. Just talking to families in recent weeks, there are some families who are doing quite well. They're getting their assignments from teachers and they're able to complete them. And there are some families who have completely thrown in the towel. It's just too much right now. There's a lot of stresses happening within the home. It's sometimes unmanageable. People are working, people have other stresses going on in their lives. And some families have said, you know what, my kids are going, especially young kids, my kids are going to do other things instead. And that's okay. And so you're seeing a wide variety of things happening in households right now.
Well, let me follow up, Caroline. You say it's okay, but that does mean that that means that the vast difference of the kind of education that kids are getting over the last 3 months of their school year will be as dramatic as it's ever been. Oftentimes it's different because of, someone lives in a rich neighborhood or someone lives in a less well-off neighborhood. Now we've got even more different metrics by which education is going to be different, in which case, if you pass the year, which everybody's going to do, is that a good thing?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question, right? Because the boards and the ministry has said that marks only count till March break. And if you improve, you'll see an improvement in your mark, but you won't be affected negatively by that. Steve, in the summer, when the school year starts in the fall, we tend to see among kids, among some kids, the summer slide, the summer learning loss. And teachers do a very good job, or they're trained to do a very good job in the first few weeks of the school year to review material from the previous year. And I believe that will happen if school starts up again in the fall, and it'll be more pronounced to catch those kids up that perhaps said, we can't do it anymore, or families that said, we are going to just stop right now and take a break from schooling.
Yeah, Annie, what do we do about the fact that the consistency, which is never 100% to begin with, is going to be even worse now?
Well, I think learned from it. I think that's our biggest hope, that one of the things we learned is schools are really important and they do an incredible job. And part of the job that they do is kind of leveling that playing field in terms of providing, all of the resources and support, or as many as possible, in order to kind of mitigate, which is not a very nice word, all the differences between families. And I think that the differences between families aren't because they don't care about education, but it is. Like, some families are under incredible stress, or they've lost their jobs, or they're still essential workers, or they don't have the technology at home. I think the other thing that we've learned right now is that the inequity isn't about necessarily whether or not you have a computer, it's whether or not you have all the other stuff, especially time, in order to support your children. I think that we shouldn't worry too much, as Caroline said, that it's important that we understand that learning takes a lot of forms and happens in a lot of different ways. People have been complaining for years that the curriculum's too packed. There are too many, outcomes in it that are supposed to be met. So hopefully what's happening now is that we're reinforcing that understanding that learning happens in a discussion that you're having in whatever kind of way kids are connecting with their teachers. And it's not necessarily that you lose 3 months of school, you lose 3 months of learning, or is that every single thing in those 3 months was an absolute necessity in order to go on to the next year. So, but I think that that's what's interesting, that Prachi mentions about the study in the Netherlands, that we really hope that there's a lot of research being done now. There's a deeper understanding of how learning does happen, all the different ways, what's more effective, how we engage students, things like that. But I don't think that it's, in the grand scheme of things, that 3 months is going to have an enormous kind of impact on kids that can't be undone.
No, I hear you, but Prachi, follow up in this regard, if you would. I love the notion of the education system as the great leveler in society, meaning that obviously, whether you come from a very rich background or not so rich a background, if 95% of the kids are in the same public education system and it's a decent quality, regardless of where you go to school, everybody's got a shot. Everybody's got a shot. But apropos of what Caroline said as well, this so-called learning loss that normally takes place over the summer is actually, for a lot of kids, starting right now. How is the education system going to overcome the learning loss that's happening now on top of the learning loss that's going to happen in the summer? Just feels to me the great leveler is not leveling right now.
So that is the hope with education systems, that it is a great leveler. In fact, much of the research that we have over the last 50 or 60 years in most contexts, including Canada, but generally globally around the world, is that we find that's actually not always the case. And in many societies, that's not the case, that education is not the great leveler unless we make it a concerted effort to be that way. So in terms of what we're talking about of learning loss, we have to remember a few things. Firstly, we entered the pandemic in a somewhat disrupted environment for education in Ontario. Right. There was a teacher strike, which I personally supported, but there was some disruption, but it was, I think in my mind, minimal disruption. Boards and teachers did the best that they could in terms of rotation strikes, but there was a little bit of disruption there. Of course, no one thought that we were now going to be in a situation where essentially almost half the school year is going to be gone. And I do say half the school year because we have to remember that when we talk about learning loss in the summer, we're talking about losses that occur after we've actually gone through a whole year of instruction, a whole year of schooling. That's not the case here. We entered this pandemic in March. There was disruption before that. We also had Christmas holidays and holidays before that. So in terms of really looking at instruction, we have to see that we didn't actually enter the pandemic in the best of circumstances. We entered it in much better circumstances than many, many other countries globally. We are in a relative time of peace. We are a G7 country that has many, many resources to devote. We did enter it in a better circumstance, but it's not ideal. And when we talk about automatic promotion, I'm not entirely sure that automatic promotion in a context where we do not have indications yet from the government in terms of what the next school year is going to look like, whether or not that's a great idea. So, for example, if what we want is for children to enter, for example, grade 3 next year, they're in grade 2 right now, they want to enter grade 3 next year, what is that curriculum actually going to look like? I think the idea that teachers are going to have to catch up all the kids of whatever it is they missed in grade 2, and then on top of it, teach the grade 3 curriculum is just going to be stressful for the teachers, stressful for the children, and it's not the way that we'll be able to see learning gains. Probably what we want to do is see how we can reform that curriculum for next year and the year after, to actually take into consideration the effect of the pandemic on learning.
Well, I was going to get to this later, but since you've raised it now, Caroline, do you know whether there's any discussion at all? I mean, I know what they've said already. They've said everybody's going to get their year. But is there or should there be some discussion at the highest levels in this province about whether or not just to call this year a mulligan and have all the students do it again?
As far as I'm aware, there's no discussions happening around that. There could be, but I'm not aware of it. It's a tricky thing, Steve. It's a tricky thing to have students redo their previous year. What do you do in high school? What do you do for those students that are earning credits? Are you asking them to go back and redo some of those credits, redo what they have done? It's a really tough situation right now. I don't know actually how you would handle something like that.
But there's nobody out there who's going to convince anybody that a pre-pandemic grade 12 grad is the equivalent to a in the middle of a pandemic grade 12 grad. The education just is not the same. Annie, I wonder if that does suggest that there's a good argument for calling this year a mulligan and having everybody do it again.
I can only imagine the reaction to that. I think what's important, again, I think that you're right. We can't pretend it's the same. And I kind of love Prachi's idea of that, there's a kind of an opportunity here to look at the curriculum, not just because of the pandemic, but because curriculum should be looked at anyway, and not just to tweak, but to make sure that it matches, all the things that everybody is saying people need to know how to do in order to be successful. So even thinking about grade 12 students who still have another month and a half of school thereabouts, it's trying to make sure that we're building those skills in those kids, that they're able to handle the transition to whatever kind of post-secondary thing they're doing, whether they're going to university or college, apprenticeships or getting a job, that it's not necessarily that they missed that last section in calculus that's going to affect them, though it might, but it's whether or not they actually can handle the transition. They know how to work independently. They know how to collaborate. They know how to take responsibility for their own work. So I think this is an argument for looking at all the curriculum all the way up and down. But I don't think that it's necessary to say this year doesn't count at all. Hopefully, kids were learning up until the middle of March, and hopefully they are still learning in different ways. And it's interesting right now watching the provincial government and everybody and directors trying to figure out how to do this. Like, can you send a directive to teachers saying you must do it this way? How does that take into account different families? How do you make sure there's some accountability for what's going on? But again, understanding all the different circumstances so that we're not giving up. And I think that some of the people we should be listening to are like Prachi, are people who are experts on learning in an emergency, because that's what this is. This isn't e-learning. It's not homeschooling. It's not, let's just take it all online. This is an emergency. And there are lots of experts in that who have been dealing with schools closing because of Ebola or because of war. And that there are things that we could learn and understand from them. And I think that what they know is you can't just go, which is a bit of what got said in a directive from the ministry on Friday. You can't go, it's just like school, except it's happening in your computer at home, because it's not just like school. And so I think that we have to be open still, and we have to not give up on this year. It's still only the middle of May, to what other ways could we be doing this? How could we be using, other kinds of technology, or even things that aren't so high tech, like radio or whatever, to make sure that in whatever way families can access this, that it's easy for them, but that there are lots of choices in it. But then again, within, some kind of structure, some kind of sense of accountability, some kind of way to support teachers so that they're collaborating with each other and working together as a school. I obviously don't have the answers. I'm not an expert on education in emergencies, but they are out there. And I think we should be listening to them too.
Okay, but before we consider that, Caroline, I wonder if you could help us understand, okay, there's the littlest kids in JK and SK, and then you've got elementary school, and then you've got middle school, and then you've got high school. Which cohort of students do you think this pandemic has been most injurious to their education?
Well, I personally, I have a 5-year-old and 9-year-old at home, and the 5-year-old in SK is quite content just coloring and, building forts and having the best time and reading, and she's fine. I think the impact is the greatest for the high school kids, quite frankly. I think they are the ones who, especially the graduating class, those are the ones who were looking forward to those occasions of their graduation ceremonies and proms where they're held, and they're missing out on that. They are the ones who receive more feedback, I would imagine, from teachers. They are moving from class to class. They're working towards post-secondary or the workforce. And, those are the kids who are, I think, missing the most. The younger kids, I think, my 5-year-old, my 9-year-old will be fine. And most kids, they're missing school, they're missing their friends, they're missing sort of the interaction, and they'll go back and they'll be happy whenever that happens, and they'll be fine. But I think it's the high school kids that are missing sort of the learning that takes place in the classroom, the interaction that takes place with teachers and their peers.
Prachi, is that your sense of it? The older you are, the worse it is for you?
I think, these are all right at this point. This is all conjecture. I think the students that are coming in from grade 12 into university, if they're going into Ontario universities, I'm at university and I know the background discussions around that. We're trying very hard to be more responsive in terms of next year. And the professors that are going to be teaching those first year classes, they're going to be very cognizant of the fact that these students are coming in with an incomplete kind of full education. So in my mind at the university, those students that are coming in from grade 12 to university, in my mind, they're entering a more flexible system. So in that sense, I think we have a little bit more flexibility at that level to kind of address some of those issues. But I would like to go back to something that Annie has said in terms of education and emergencies. We have, I think, in Canada generally, been very fortunate that we have not had conflict on our soil. And that is a great boon. I started my career in education and emergencies 20 years ago, and I worked in conflict zones, and this was exactly what I was doing. And those
Where did you work, can I ask?
In Kosovo and Albania and Bosnia during the Kosovo conflict. And that was exactly what I did. It was in terms of how do we provide education in a context of mass disruption. In those contexts, it was a context of mass disruption for 10 years. Here we're talking about mass disruption for a few months, but the issues around what we miss out during that time, socially, the psychosocial impact, the education impact, all of that are issues that we in Canada have been fortunate enough not to deal with. But because we've been so fortunate, we're also less prepared. So our ministries, for example, of health and education, I don't think there was that much coordination between them before this pandemic. And I'm not entirely sure how much coordination there is now in terms of having task forces that are looking at psychosocial well-being for children and adults, looking at how the curriculum reform should be. We need actually to take some clear decisions, even in the face of incomplete information. We know what our school year usually looks like. We know what we're trying to achieve in terms of a school year. What we need to be asking are questions like, are we going to stay with the idea that the school year starts in September and ends in June? Or are we going to be thinking about opening a little bit earlier if it's possible? And if we do, what is that curriculum going to look like for the next 2 years? How are we going to take perhaps half of grade 2 and half of grade 3, and that becomes the new curriculum for grade 3? And then do we do that throughout the system? And how do we look at the integration from primary to middle, from middle to secondary? Those are the questions we need to be asking. And more than asking, we need to see some strong directives from the government in terms of setting up a task force and really thinking about how to move this forward rather than week by week or month by month assessments.
Well, Annie, that suggests some real big picture thinking right now, which, but can you do that kind of big thing? I know the expression, you never let a crisis go to waste. So this is in some respects an opportunity to really open things up and consider vastly new ways of doing things. But, governments today look like they're just racing around as fast as they can to put out fires, let alone to engage in this kind of big thinking. Can we do this now?
I think we can, and I think that it's worrying that there is that perception, and I think it's partly true, the putting out fires one, but it is an opportunity. And I mean, we just put out a report on technology, and we went back in and rewrote it and going, now we have even more of an opportunity to understand how, technology is not just a machine, how that kind of supports learning. But I want to answer kind of all three questions, because I think that the kids who are most at risk aren't any particular age. They're the ones who are already at risk. I mean, I talked to a high school teacher who said, I'm not worried about the kids that I'm in contact with. I'm worried about the kids I'm not in contact with. And they were always the kids that were going to struggle. And I think that it is an opportunity right now to go, okay, yes, this is the pandemic and this is this emergency, but Prachi's point is so good about health and education working together. But how do we understand that also what it's exposed, which is suddenly this has reminded us about families and all the different circumstances of families and how much need that they have. And somebody was writing about this and going, this reminds us that schools are our most important social safety net. Well, that's great. And that may be true. But now that we are reminded again about families who are struggling or families who have always had a hard time, not from anything that they're doing wrong, but providing all of the extra kind of support, information, whatever context for kids to learn. Are we going to think about that now? And are there other things we could be doing in terms of community and families? And I think it's a great idea, a task force, that actually we're putting that in place right now, because there already have been calls for years, us among them, for, an evolution in public education, for thinking about the future of public education. And what we don't want to do is go Band-Aid, Band-Aid, Band-Aid on top of the pandemic. And then how can we get sort of back to normal? And instead, it's how can we look at all the stuff that we've learned and kind of go forward, or, people are talking about bouncing forward as opposed to bouncing back. And we could be doing that. People are doing some incredible thinking about learning right now. There are conferences happening with people from all over the world now, which we wouldn't have been able to do before. So let's use it to make some changes, not just to address the pandemic, but for the long term. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant.
No, we enjoy your rants, which is why we keep inviting you back onto this program. But Caroline, I'll ask you the same question I asked you earlier, just in a different context. Any indication that you're getting that people at the highest levels of this government are considering these very big questions about the future of education?
I think, you're right, Steve. There's a bit of scramble going on school extensions right now and, school closure extensions. And people are sort of focused on that and how to get learning to how kids are learning, how to get teachers involved in getting kids learning. And right now, I think it's a great period to also, for people in government, perhaps to pause, to stop, to rethink aspects of
Yeah.
education, rethink sort of what we've been doing in classrooms and how we've been addressing student needs. Looking at students at risk, kids, who were at risk in the classroom continue being falling behind at home. Well, what are we doing when these kids return back to the classroom? How are we rethinking their education? What are we doing with technology? How are we
Yeah.
rethinking how technology is used in education? That's a big question that nobody sort of approached. Look at class sizes. Class sizes was a huge source of tension in the current negotiations with teachers. Well, you can't, when we do return to the classroom, whenever that is, without a vaccine, we can't have classrooms of 20 kids,
Yeah.
23 kids plus. We got to rethink how we do things. And this is a great period, I think, for government leaders to sort of pause, to step back, rethink aspects of education like class size, like technology, like students who are disadvantaged, and reassess what needs to be done.
Well,
Because
can I
right
jump
now,
in on that for a second, Caroline? Talk about recessing or reassessing, or
reassessing.
can you put 20 kids? I'm not saying this well, but I'm looking at the province right next door, which has, relatively speaking, the worst record on fighting COVID, and they have a disproportionate amount of the suffering going on there, and their kids are back in the classrooms this week. What's the plan in Quebec?
So Quebec has reopened schools outside of Montreal this week. Kids started back yesterday. They pushed back. Montreal's opening was supposed to be next week, but they pushed that to the following week, and they'll probably do that again if the situation doesn't stabilize. It's interesting to watch what's happening in these Quebec schools. The variation and uptake for student families returning is huge. And I spoke with some boards where they were expecting 80% of their kids to return, and another board that was expecting a third of their kids to return. Parents are feeling anxious about this, and just watching sort of the measures that they've been put in place around social distancing. And please keep in mind that these are the youngest kids. So these are not high school kids. These are elementary schools and daycares that have returned. So
Hmm.
high school continues online. But social distancing measures, hand hygiene measures, only teaching the core subjects. So phys ed is out, art is out, drama
Yeah.
is out. There's a lot happening there to sort of bring these kids back. And I think Ontario and other provinces are watching this closely, because when our children return back, whether it be September, we're going to be watching Quebec and other countries to see how they're doing it and what can be applied in Ontario.
Hmm. Prachi, is there a reopening for the province of Ontario that you think makes sense?
I think this is a great question in terms of what's happening in Quebec and the response in other provinces. Quebec, unfortunately, is the epicenter of the pandemic here in Canada. And we are seeing increases in numbers of deaths, and we're also seeing substantial numbers of cases every day, in the hundreds. I think on the weekend it was 700 and a few new cases. These are not conditions in which it is advisable to reopen schools. And the reason I say that is because we are now slowly seeing some global evidence emerging from other countries that have reopened. Denmark is being followed very closely. It was the first country in Europe to reopen. It reopened about 2 weeks ago. And initially, they saw an increase in infections. But the difference in Denmark is that they controlled the spread very extensively before they
Hmm.
opened schools and businesses. They modeled for the increase. They kind of had different models in terms of what happens if the infection rate goes up by this much and that much. Can our health system actually sustain that? And they modeled it. And so the increase was modeled and accepted, and that is the conditions in which the schools opened. And they opened with extensive physical distancing measures. If people are interested, UNICEF and UNESCO have put out a whole list of guidelines in terms of that online. But what we're seeing now in Denmark is that the infection rate is not going up. Initially it did, and now it isn't. And the reason, I don't think, is specifically because of schools. The reason is because they did a very integrated approach in terms of opening up society generally. And they did that at a time when it was safe to do so. France opened up on the same day as Quebec. And people in France are exactly as worried and nervous as they are in Quebec. Other countries like South Korea, that was seen as an early place in terms of really controlling the virus, kept schools closed throughout this first phase of controlling the transmission, even though the rest of their economy and businesses were open, and they actually avoided the strict lockdown that we did in most of the other countries. So these are differentiated responses, but we're seeing that in cases where schools are open and they're open safely, it's in contexts where there has been a very effective control of that virus. And I'm not sure that we're there yet in Ontario. We're certainly not there in Quebec. Some of the other Canadian provinces are perhaps in a better position to think about that more substantially and more and sooner than we are. But there are no shortcuts. If we want to reopen society and we want to reopen our economies, what we have to do is institute mass health measures and then actually integrate that with our other sectors. And in education, what we need to be thinking about is, yes, of course, formal schooling, informal schools is our goal. But if we cannot do that in the interim, what are better solutions than really just transferring all learning online in an emergency response, which is what we might have done in week 1, 2, and 3. But as this continues, we really do need to think about what are the other ways that we might have to deliver schooling. Might it mean that certain children return to formal schools in shorter bursts of time? And what does that mean if they're in school for 3 days and out of school for 2 weeks, 2 days of the week? What does that mean for the 2 days that they're not in? How are we looking at this as an integrated response? These are big questions, but I really don't see a lot of countries. Canada is not alone. I don't see a lot of countries addressing these questions in a more sustainable way.
Well, I'm glad the three of you did during the time that we've had here on TVO tonight, and I'm grateful to all of you for coming on. Caroline Alphonso from the Globe and Mail, Prachi Srivastava from Western University, Annie Kidder, People for Education. Be safe, you three, and again, thanks for coming on TVO tonight.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.